Hi everyone, thank you for coming back to my channel. In this video, I'll continue to discuss the development of New World Order over the years and the sinister plans behind the humanity. Okay, let's get started. Secretive negotiations continue. Legislative debate is excluded and public inclusion and debate are off the table. In May year 2005, the CFR Independent Task Force on the Future of North America published a follow-up report titled Building a North American Community, proposing a borderless three-nation union by year 2010. In June and July year 2005, the Dominican Republic Central America Free Trade Agreement passed the Senate and House establishing corporate-approved trade rules to further impoverish the region and move a step closer to continental integration. In March year 2006, the North American Competitiveness Council was created at the second SPP summit in Cancun, Mexico, composed of 30 top North American CEOs. It serves as an official trilateral SPP working group. Secret business and government meetings continue, so there is no way to confirm SPP's current status or if Barack Obama is seamlessly continuing George Bush's agenda. In an earlier article, this writer said, SPP efforts paused during the Bush to Obama transition, but deep integration plans remain. Canada's Fraser Institute proposed renaming the initiative the North American Standards and Regulatory Area to disguise its real purpose. It said the SPP brand is tarnished, so rebranding is essential to fool the public until it's too late to matter. Bilderberger's trilateralists and CFR leaders back it as another step toward global integration and won't stop until the entire world is unified under the auspice and the political umbrella of a one-world company, a nightmarish borderless world run by the world's most powerful clique, comprised of key elite members of these dominant organizations. In April year 2007, the Transatlantic Economic Council was established between America and the EU to create an official international governmental body by executive fiat, harmonize economic and regulatory objectives, move toward a transatlantic common market, and a step closer to one world government run by the world's most powerful corporate interests. Insights into the year 2009 Bilderberg Group meeting. From May 14 to 17, Bilderbergers held their annual meeting in Vouliagmeni, Greece, and according to Daniel Estulin, have dire plans for global economies. According to his pre-meeting sources, they are divided on two alternatives. Either a prolonged, agonizing depression that dooms the world to decades of stagnation, decline, and poverty, or an intense but shorter depression that paves the way for a new sustainable world order with less sovereignty but more efficiency. That's what they've been doing over the years from George Bush, then Clinton, then Obama. Other agenda items include the future of the US dollar and US economy, Continued deception about green shoots signaling an end to recession and improving economy later in the year, suppressing the fact that bank stress tests were a sham and were designated for deception, not an accurate assessment of major banks' health. That's been what they've been doing. The unemployment rate and all the statistics under the deep state government, they've been faking the numbers, and that's why right now President Trump, he's been leveraging this fault from the deep state to fool them back and take them down. Projecting headlined U.S. unemployment to hit 14% by year end, way above current forecasts, and meaning the true number will be double at minimum, with all uncounted categories included, and a final push to get the Lisbon Treaty passed for pan-EU adoption of neoliberal rules, including greater privatizations, fewer worker rights and social benefits, open border trade favoring developed over emerging states, and greater militarization to suppress civil liberties and human rights. After the meeting, Estonin got a 73-page report on what was discussed. Okay, 73. If you flip it over 37, is meaning war, according to Minister Paul. You can go ahead and search him on the YouTube, and he explained he got the message from the Lord that 37 means war. He noted that one of the Bilderberg's primary concerns is the danger that their zeal to reshape the world by engineering chaos toward their long-term agenda could cause the situation to spiral out of control and eventually lead to a scenario where Bilderberg and the global elite in general are overwhelmed by events and end up losing their control over the planet. Technically, they have already erected the Georgia Guidestones, so it's like all out in public. I don't understand why they still think that it's successfully kept under the table and maintain their secrecy. So I just find it appalling. So they are going to the Bilderberg meetings. Estelin also noted some considerable disagreement between headliners wanting a dramatic decline and severe short-term depression versus others who think that things have gone too far, so that the fallout from the global economic cataclysm can be may be greater than anticipated and may harm Bilderberger interests. Also, some European bankers expressed great alarm over their own fate and called the current high-wire act unsustainable. There was a combination of agreement and fear that the situation remains dire and the worst of the crisis lies ahead, mainly because of the America's extreme debt level that must be resolved to produce a healthy, sustainable recovery. That is what President Trump's been doing, try to take down the central banks all over the world, because the central banks and all the bankers controlling our financial industry. So technically controlling our finances and transfer our wealth to the rich. Topics also include establishing a global treasury department and global central bank, possibly partnered with or as part of the IMF, a global currency, one world currency, which is the digital currency that they will introduce pretty soon, I'm sure, because I've heard that the platform's already been set up and finalized, and it's not what it looks like. It's not Bitcoin, it's not Litecoin. Those are just the testing and just to get people hyped up and get used to the digital currency. Then they will officially push out their digital currency. It's totally different than Bitcoin and Litecoin. Okay, so destruction of the dollar through what longtime market analyst Bob Chapman calls a stealth default on US debt by continuing to issue massive amounts of money and credit and in the process devaluing the dollar, a process he calls fraud. A global legal system, I believe is UN, United Nations, and they have the army penetrated in the US already, and of course they already infiltrate the Mexican government. So we are in danger, really. And of course, the Justin Trudeau from Canada, he's a Freemason. So think about it. Exploiting the swine flu scare to create a WHO Global Department of Health. I think swine flu and also Ebola right now. And the overall goal of a global government and the end of national sovereignty. That's been President Trump, then right now Boris Johnson, and the Italian Deputy Prime Minister Matteo Salvini. Three of them fighting against the giving up sovereignty and personal freedom, liberty. In the past, excellent sources proved accurate. Earlier, he predicted the housing crash and year 2007 to year 2008 financial market decline, preceded by the kind of financial crisis triggered by the Lehman Brothers collapse. Watch for further updates from him as new information leaks out on what the world's power elites have planned going forward. This time will be Deutsche Bank collapse to trigger the whole global finance to collapse and never recover. Then they push out the Antichrist global currency and force everybody to have mark of the beast. If not, you cannot have the digital currency in your digital account and buy and sell, etc. The year 2014 meeting of the Bilderberg Group will take place in Denmark at the end of May. Two of the best people to follow in terms of news and developments who have proven over and over again that they are ahead of the game in what is coming next are Max Kaiser and Gerald Celente. United Nations. A brief history of the UN. The idea for creating the United Nations was born a few years before the First World War. The idea was named League of Nations and came from a book of fiction called Philip Drew, Administrator. The author was Woodrow Wilson's socialist right-hand man, Colonel House. House later admitted the book was fact presented as fiction. See, this is the pentagram. President Wilson's biographer, George Sylvester Farragut. The Wilson administration transferred to the Colonel's ideas from the pages of fiction to the pages of history. In his novel published anonymously 2 years before the First World War had even begun. He proposed a League of Nations. The United Nations was founded on October 24, 1945. After the war, despite enormous influence and money backing, the idea came to naught because the United States would not support it. But not to worry, the socialist backing for the League already had its sights on a successor, the United Nations. All that was needed to coerce the ship into the fold was bigger war, and was another big war. This was not to be a problem because the seeds for this war were already planted at Versailles. Following Germany's surrender, two committees were established to administer details of post-war policies. Woodrow Wilson appointed Bernard Baruch to represent the U.S. on the Economic Committee, and Thomas W. Lamont of J.P. Morgan spoke for U.S. interests on the Financial Committee. Baruch's group decided that Germany would pay $12 billion in reparations, and together with other limitations on the German economy, the new German Republic was doomed to fail. In doing so, social conditions would ripen for the rise of power of Adolf Hitler. Once the banksters were assured that Hitler was their man, rivers of money flowed out of the Federal Reserve to build Germany's infrastructure and Adolf's war machine. This all occurred during the Great Depression, while the people of the United States were losing their farms, homes, and jobs because there wasn't enough money. Yeah, because all the money flowing to Germany. Similar actions were occurring in the Pacific to bring Japan towards war, and eventually the Second World War became history with the loss of millions of lives. The banks made uncountable profits along with the industrial powers. For some, World War II was another successful venture. The same people who made profits from these wars now resurrected the League of Nations under a new banner, the United Nations. For a complete look at the history of the United Nations, read David Icke's book, And the Truth Shall Set You Free. The above is just a thumbnail history of the UN. By visiting the official United Nations website, you will find even less history. The United Nations is the greatest fraud in history. Its purpose is to destroy the United States. John E. Rankin, a U.S. congressman. Again, they bring down Japan in Second World War, then to have Japan totally surrender to the Freemason Illuminati, the deep state, of course. Then now Japan, ever since then, has been a proxy in Asia to influence the whole Asia. I'm sorry to say that. Hopefully, I won't offend anybody who likes Japan. That's what it is. It is what it is. Japan, New Zealand, everybody knows. The age of nations must end. The governments of nations have decided to order their separate sovereignties into one government to which they will surrender their arms. UN World Constitution. The first President of the United Nations General Assembly, Paul Henri Spaak, who was also a Prime Minister of Belgium and one of the early partners of the European Common Market, as well as a Secretary General of NATO, affirmed, of course, Belgium. Everything is from Belgium, all the planning and strategic plannings. and rules and regulations. We do not want another committee. We have too many already. What we want is a man of sufficient stature to hold the alliance of all the people and to lift us up out of the economic morass into which we are sinking. Send us such a man, and whether he be God or devil, we will receive him. No one will enter the New World Order unless he or she will make a pledge to worship Lucifer. No one will enter the New Age unless he will take a Luciferian initiation. David Sprengler, Director of Planetary Initiative, United Nations. So they officially admitted that they worship Lucifer. They take a Luciferian initiation already, long time ago. A top secret document. A copy of a top secret document was smuggled out of the executive office building in Washington, D.C. Parts of it read as follows. On transfer of sovereignty to the United Nations, those who do not conform to United Nations authority will be considered resistors and declared enemies of the government. Public statements in support of the old ways and favoring continued United States nationalism will be considered enemy doctrine, which is the whole deep state, UN, and other Luciferians. They have been going against President Trump and the Team Q because they continue to favor United States nationalism. And I think yesterday, FBI just stated that conspiracy theories are terrorists and they will take down people that promote conspiracy theories. That is exactly what they wanted now. The purpose for the buildup of world wars was to create a need for peace so that a United Nations may be needed and then created as a solution for establishing peace between nations. Over the past few months, they tried to lure President Trump to start the World War III with Iran, but it has not been successful, and now they try to lure Boris Johnson to start the World War III, but I'm sure he will not do that either. So I'm sure eventually the deep state has to be the one pull the trigger and created a false flag and then pointing finger to someone. I mean, a country. So peace, which is order out of chaos, and then so according to the Bible, when people say peace and safety, that is when the war start. A world body of government with a world court and a world police to keep nations in place and to concentrate power into a few people's hands. Whose hands? William Howard Taft, Skull and Bones graduate of 1878, helped found the American Society for the Judicial Settlement of International Disputes in 1920. Of course, Skull and Bones is one of the key factors too. This soon became the League to Enforce the Peace, then the League of Nations, and then finally the United Nations. If you look at things from a historical perspective, the UN today has implemented or is in the process of implementing all the planks of Adam Weishaupt's manifesto. In 1848, Karl Marx wrote the 10 planks of the Communist Manifesto, which he copied from an article written by Adam Weishaupt in 1797. This article was named How to Change a Republic into a Democracy. It is the foundation of what communist ideology is all about. Again, they try to destroy America's republic. It's a republic country, and they try to turn it into democracy, a fake democracy, which is equal to communist, not socialist anymore, because socialist is part of the communist, branch out from the communist ideology. United Nations Agenda 21. Effective execution of Agenda 21 will require a profound reorientation of all human society. Unlike anything the world has ever experienced, a major shift in the priorities of both governments and individuals, and an unprecedented redeployment of human and financial resources. This shift will demand that a concern for the environmental consequences of every human action be integrated into individual and collective decision making at every level. Excerpt UN Agenda 2021. So a few weeks ago, I've done a video regarding the beehive mind, which is what they want, collective decision making. They try to turn us into bee, and then they are the queen to control us. The history and origins of Agenda 21. Agenda 21 was the main outcome of the United Nations Earth Summit held in Rio de Janeiro in 1992. Agenda 21 outlines in detail the UN's vision for a centrally managed global society. This contract binds governments around the world to the United Nations plan for controlling the way we live, eat, learn, move, and communicate, all under the noble banner of saving the earth. So bear in mind their New Green Deal and global climate change agendas, all because of they wanted us our taxpayer money. That is another reason why President Trump, when he first got elected, he backed out on the global climate change Paris Agreement because it's all a scam. It's just a scam to get the US taxpayer money just for the elite to share, divided among themselves. If fully implemented, Agenda 21 would have the government involved in every aspect of life of every human on Earth. At the summit, 179 nations officially signed Agenda 21, and many more have followed since. Nearly 12,000 local and federal authorities have legally committed themselves to the agenda. In practice, this means that all their plans and policies must begin with an assessment of how the plan or policy meets the requirements of Agenda 21, and no plans or policies are allowed to contradict any part of the agenda. Local authorities are audited by UN inspectors, and the results of the audits are placed on the UN website. You can see how many local authorities in your country were bound by Agenda 21 in year 2001 here. The number has increased significantly since then. I've done a video on Agenda 21. So you can go back to my previous video and watch it. Agenda 21, which reportedly means an agenda for the 21st century, is a United Nations program launched in 1992 for the vague purpose of achieving global sustainable development. Since then, the UN has mostly bypassed national governments, using Agenda 21's International Council of Local Environmental Initiatives to make agreements directly with local governments. U.S. presence has grown to include agreements with over 600 cities, towns, and counties here, which are now copying the land use plans prescribed in Agenda 21. Some conservatives are trying to attract attention to Agenda 21 by labeling it a secret conspiracy to create a one world government. While that will wake some people up, it will turn off others. It does not matter whether it is a conspiracy or not. There are people on the left side of the political spectrum who may even believe they have good intentions, working together to spread their vision for society worldwide. Whether they meet in dark rooms or openly in public meetings is irrelevant. They are having great success convincing local governments in the United States to adopt their socialist and extreme environmentalist programs under the guise of feel-good buzzwords. Left-wing billionaire George Soros' Open Society has provided $2 million to ICLEI. Agenda 21 ostensibly seeks to promote sustainability, the latest revisionist word for environmentalism, since Americans have learned too many negative things about environmentalism. Sustainability is an amorphous concept that can be interpreted to an extreme degree that would regulate and restrict many parts of our lives. When will the level of carbon emissions be low enough? How much must we reduce our consumption of fossil fuels? Preserving the environment is a dubious science, and what steps are really necessary to protect the environment are anyone's guess. Agenda 21 promotes a European socialist goals that will erode our freedoms and liberties. Most of its vague, lofty-sounding phrases cause the average person's eyes to gaze over, making it easier to sneak into our communities. The environmentalist goals include atmospheric protection, combating pollution, protecting fragile environments, and conserving biological diversity. Agenda 21 goes well beyond environmentalism. Other broad goals include combating poverty, changing consumption patterns, promoting health, and reducing private property ownership, single-family homes, private car ownership, and privately owned farms. It seeks to cram people into small livable areas and institute population control. There is a plan for social justice that will redistribute wealth. In the process of implementing sustainable development, you will be required to surrender your individual rights. You must give up all private ownership of land. The environment will be used simply as the means to promote a political agenda. Restructuring of governmental systems of the world's nations so that all the people of the world will be the subjects of a global collective, beehive mind, collective thinking. Powerful behavior control techniques and peer pressure used to make developing children question their individual worth and values, designated to disrupt parental oversight in the upbringing of their children. Control of our food and water, as well as natural seeds to grow our own food. Once these vague, overly broad goals are adopted, they are being interpreted to allow massive amounts of new overreaching regulations. Joyce Morrison from Ecologic Powerhouse says Agenda 21 is so broad it will affect the way we live, eat, learn, and communicate. I think already happened right now. They've been using the media, entertainment industry, trends to control us and brainwash everybody, and so that people will use peer pressure on people that don't conform. Barrett Kajas, author of Brave New Schools, warns that Agenda 21 regulation would severely limit water, electricity, and transportation, even deny human access to our most treasured wilderness areas. It would monitor all lands and people. No one would be freed from the watchful eye of the new global tracking and information system. Even one of the authors of Agenda 21 has admitted that it calls for specific changes in the activities of all people. These steps are already being enacted little by little at the local levels. I think it's the social score in several countries in China, Mexico, and then I don't remember what other countries, but they've been implementing this, and they've been using AI to monitor us. The Google Home system, and then series from Amazon, etc. Since the US is one of the wealthiest countries in the world and uses more energy than any other country, it stands to lose the most from environmental regulations. The goal of sustainability, which comes down to using government to heavy-handedly accomplish vague goals of caring for the earth, goes contrary to our free market capitalism. Even more unfair, struggling third world countries and communist countries that cannot financially afford to comply with the onerous environmental regulations will continue their high levels of fossil fuel consumption, and the US will be forced by UN regulators. That's why President Trump, when he first got elected, he backed out on the Paris Agreement because it's a bullshit. It's what they want us to pay for the whole world. The UN in summary. Since the mid-1940s, people have been deceived into thinking that the United Nations is a peace organization, committed to solving conflicts before they start, and using legislation instead of war to solve international disputes. Actually, it's quite the opposite. They covertly induce conflicts and to start the war between countries. In actuality, the UN is one of the greatest threats to our liberty and freedom. The UN's philosophy is both anti-American and pro-totalitarian. They completely ignore our founding documents, such as the Declaration of Independence and the Constitution. The UN was founded by communists whose goal was a socialist global government. Al-Jahis, one of the most prominent persons responsible for the UN, was non-communist, and he wasn't the only one. Along with the communists, there were other groups at work to establish a socialistic world government. There have only been socialists or communists who have been Secretary General of the UN. The Soviet spy Hitler was the first Secretary General, and his successors have followed in his footsteps in ideology. The UN seeks power to control the world by using environmental, population, and children's issues. What they don't tell you is that many of these issues are either fabricated or completely twisted around. So, for example, the children issue is the vaccination. The UN Charter paves the way for world tyranny. They may use any force necessary, whether by land, sea, or air, to solve world conflicts, although they have no right to be there. The UN is building its own army to enforce what the UN wants. Amazingly, the majority of soldiers in this army are Americans. Not only is this organization anti-American, it is using our people to enforce its will. The UN has never settled a dispute. It has made them worse. We easily could have won in Korea, but UN regulations then and now say we aren't allowed to engage an enemy, and if they fire at us, we aren't allowed to fire back. That I don't understand this point. They make it worse. They actually behind the scenes manipulate the players to play good guy, bad guy. That's what they do. It's not because can we fire at the enemy or not. It is not. This is all on the surface. But under the surface, beneath the surface, they play both sides so that the conflict, of course, will escalate, right? That's what they've been doing all these years. The UN praises communist countries while condemning free ones. Okay, so example of this are when Nelson Mandela achieved power in 1990s. He was a self-proclaimed communist and terrorist, yet the UN granted him power. It's not because UN praises communist countries, it just UN praises communists because they are the root of communist ideology. And I'm sure Nelson Mandela could be one of their players, one of their puppets. So that's why they promote him. Not because of they praise as communist country. It's because they control everything. Remember that. The UN embraces communist China, one of the history's most notorious regimes. Again, refer back to the previous ones, the same. They infiltrated every single country already on Earth. There's no one country is free from UN or free from Luciferian, Freemasonry, Illuminati, etc. They just play both sides, good guy and bad guy. Eventually, trigger the war between countries, within the country is between people. Before it's in China, they divided China into two groups because they have two parties, and then they had internal conflict, and then that's why one of the groups escaped. I don't know if it's escaped or just all along their plans. One of the groups went to Taiwan and established there. So that's what they want. The history repeating itself right now in US. So back then it's China, and then they divided China into two, and then control the island and name it as Taiwan. And actually, all the deep state players include, for example, the 13 bloodlines that I've talked about in my very first video, the first three videos. The 13 bloodlines have created their territories in every country. in Asia Pacific, in Europe, of course, and here in North America, South America. So, for example, in Asia, it would be China, Hong Kong, and then maybe Singapore. They are belonged to Rockefeller, and then Taiwan, Japan, and Thailand. They are belonged to Morgan, for example. So technically, they already control every single country, but now they want to play good guy and bad guy. They want conflicts within the country and in the world. So that's why they made they have made China as a bad guy. Then surrounding China, those countries are good guys. So there's conflict in, right? So that's how they control the region. So as here now, history repeating itself. Now they use that tactic in U.S. They divide the people in U.S. into two groups. They're fighting against each other, and then leave us vulnerable because we've been fighting against each other instead of stand together and fight against them. So, which is united we stand, divided we fall. Which back then was China, now is U.S. That's what they do. Okay. The UN is a moral cesspool of perverts and fat cats. The UN supports child molestation groups. It's not only molestation, it's satanic child sex trafficking, such as North American Man-Boy Love Association and the Dutch group Veneraging Martin. And the Relief Fund for Children, UNICEF, actually is handed over to terrorist groups. Again, right now, President Trump is trying to take down Red Cross, one of the huge non-profit organization. They've been involved in so many different crimes, like you can think of. So all the major non-profit organizations, I'm not saying the little ones not involved or the little ones are involved, but the major non-profit organizations, they've been involved in all this satanic child sex trafficking, prostitution, drug dealings, trade arms, and etc. Money supplied to the UN by the United States goes in support of anti-American regimes and other enemies of ours. Again, there's no enemies. They created enemies because they brainwashed us and think that we have enemies and we have good guys and we have good guys and we have bad guys. But at the end of the day, they benefit out of it when we fight against each other. Funds such as those going for the World Bank actually are supplied to Marxist regimes who are intent on destroying the United States. Without these funds, such governments would not be able to exist. The UN is a war organization, not one that promotes peace. Governments embracing tyranny have defined peace as the absence of all opposition. This is what the UN does. It uses any force necessary to make sure tyrannists come to power while the good people left suffer, which is the opposition left suffer. And they have been involved in the French Yellow Vest movement. President Macron, he has been collaborated with UN to suppress the citizens. Committee 300. This Committee of 300 is modeled after the British East India Company's Council of 300, funded by the British aristocracy in 1727. Most of its immense wealth arose out of the opium trade with China. This group is responsible for the phony drug wars here in the US. These phony drug wars were to get us to give away our constitutional rights. Again, like I said, history repeating itself. They took down China by the opium trade. Now they are trying to take down US by a phony drug war. So it's not because a particular country is bad. It's just because they wanted to take that country down. They will do whatever to play good guy and bad guy so that people are confused and fighting against each other so that our lack of defense mechanism so they can infiltrate us. Asset forfeiture is a prime example where huge assets can be seized without trial and no proof of guilt needed. Also, the Committee of 300 long ago decreed that there shall be a smaller, much smaller and better world. That is the idea of what constitutes a better world, which is the Georgia Guidestones that they erected a few years ago. So we all know that they want to maintain the population under a certain number and control our daily beings, buy, sell, own, etc. We cannot own in the future. We cannot own anything. It's all beehive mind, collective thinking, collective ownership, which is sharing, which is communist. We share. The merits of useless eaters consuming scarce natural resources were to be culled. Industrial progress supports population growth. Therefore, the command to multiply and subdue the earth found in Genesis had to be subverted. This called for an attack upon Christianity. The slow but sure disintegration of industrial nation states, the destruction of hundreds of millions of people, referred to by the Committee of 300 as surplus population, and the removal of any leader who dared to stand in the way of the committee's global planning to reach the foregoing objectives. Not that the US government didn't know, but as it was part of the conspiracy, it helped to keep the lead on information rather than let the truth be known. Queen Elizabeth II is the head of the Committee of 300. Again, the group of people is the same as the Club of Rome. So David Rockefeller, Henry Kissinger, Bill Clinton, Gordon Brown, Angela Merkel, Alan Greenspan, etc. The most notable members of the committee were the British royal family, Dutch royal family, House of Habsburg, Lord Halifax, Winston Churchill, Cecil Rhodes, George Bush, Aldous Huxley, Henry Kissinger, David Rockefeller, Giuseppe Mazzini, H.G. Wells. The Committee of 300, Dr. John Coleman, being a historian in the intelligence community, has researched in full scope the sinister forces behind the New World Order movement. I hope you guys found this video informative, and I'll talk to you guys in the next video. Bye.